So, welcome to my tutorial on Windows Server, whereby we'll work on a couple of things that we would want to deal with our Windows Server. First thing being how to set up our Windows Server. And the server that I decided to use is Windows Server 2012. It's the R2 version, and it's got a GUI. So you can actually have your server having different perspectives and aspects that you can work with. And I'll just walk you through how to go through our Windows server. So by default, if you've opened your Windows server, you can be able to see the following, which is our server dashboard. So we can configure this local server, we can add roles and features, we can create a server group. Okay, so let's just select configure this server, and then this will take us to the next aspect of our server. So with our local server, these are some of the tasks we can see, and we've got shutdown, Windows PowerShell, computer management, refresh. We've got our properties, whereby we've got our computer name, we've got our work group, we've got our Windows file, remote management, remote desktop, etc. Okay, we still need to show how these elements can actually be used and can be set up. And as you can see, this is actually on my virtual box. So it just gives me the memory that I've got installed, the hard disk space, the processors, error reporting, even the time zone that I'm working with. So I'll leave everything as it is for now, but would want to change certain things about our server. So some of the things that we then now need to do before we start configuring our server are the following. I like to sort of have a list of things that we would want to do, and these elements would be what make us design our server for specific roles and features. Okay. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to come up with a particular concept that we'll be working with, whereby first of all we need a company name. So company name, which will be just IT, whereby we need to have some of the concepts that we want to do. So we not need to have a domain. We need to have an active directory. We need to have organizational units. We'd also need to have groups for each of these actual individuals. Okay, so this sort of gives us an idea of how many elements we want to have. So since this is a fictional company, we might need to state some of the aspects that we want, whereby we want the number of users, we want the number of units, we want some of the group policies that we have for each element. Okay, so for the organizational units, I'll just say OU, and then I'll specify what each element does. So the first organizational unit is the HR. Got the organizational unit, which is the IT, and we also want an organizational unit, which is sales, like that. So these then become our organizational units, among other things. Okay, so we would want to have maybe 6 users, which will fall under any of these units, and would also need to have IP addresses. Okay, so I think given this will help us work with our learning, and this will act or be our guide throughout the learning of this Windows Server thing. So first thing we need to do is we want to rename our server so that we know that it is for just IT. So we come to our computer name, double click on the computer name, and we want to change the computer name. So we want this to be our just IT server. Let me actually put a capital J I T server. That's what we'll call our server. We click on OK. And then for renaming our computer name, we need to restart. So as of now, I'll pause my video for a bit so that it restarts, and then we see what it looks like after it's done. So back to the server now. We are done with the renaming of the server. And now we've got just IT server as the name of our server. At the same time, we now need to work on some of the attributes that we want to add to our just IT server. So if we go to our dashboard, we can then go to add roles and features. So with our roles and features, they pretty much give us what we want to be able to use the server for. Okay. So since we said we want to have Active Directory, we want to put Active Directory features on our server. So we start at this particular point. We go to next, and then we want a role-based feature as the first option that we pick. We click on next. If we've got more than one server, we can actually start working with that server. However, we've just got the server for now. We click on next, although it's usually advised that you need to have a static IP address because we don't want people to miss our server at any given point in time. So we need to make sure we've got a static IP address when we're actually configuring some of the concepts within our server. So we click on next, and then we want to actually add Active Directory domain services. We also want to put a DHCP. Continue. We also want a DNS server so that we make this a DNS server as well. We want a remote access. Okay, and then we click on next. These are some of the attributes we want to add. From there, it tells us the next requirements of the Active Directory. Tells us about the DHCP as well, the DNS server, the remote access, and then the roles and services. I think let's pick direct access for now. Click on next. And then when everything is in order, we can then click on install. And then we wait for our server to upgrade or upload everything. Please make sure you've got an active internet connection. And with your internet connection, it just depends on how fast it is. And we just wait for it to complete our installation. So for now, I'm going to pause the video for a bit so that we wait for it to complete, and then I'll resume as soon as it's complete. So it took a bit of time, roughly 15 minutes to get to this point where we now have a list of things that it says it's done. It also is saying a pending restart on Just IT server. You must restart to finish the installation. So if I click on close, now it needs to restart our server so that we get to see what the changes look like. Okay, so let's restart. Start unplanned. We continue. Let's just see how it shuts down and starts again. Hopefully, it won't take too long because I'm trying to cut down any unnecessary minutes for our video. Seems to be taking a while. Let me pause again. So after a few minutes, we're finally done. Back to our login page. So we just log in and return to our learning. So we would expect to see a few changes on our dashboard. Each time we log in, we'll get to see how our dashboard works and what we can do with our dashboard. I will try and also include lessons on how to do remote access to our server and to have certain attributes for or on our server. So whilst our server is actually loading up, let's wait for it so that we can then get to configure certain elements that we would want to work with on our server. In the next lessons or in the next few lessons, we'll also show you how we can then be able to work with a different computer that will be accessing this particular server, because we are saying this server is for our company, which is Just IT. And as you can see now, our local server has more services that are being set up. I'm sure they're all coming up. As you can see, we pretty much still have more or less the content that we had when we started. So hopefully it won't take too long. So that's finally done. As you can see, we now have different roles for our server. The first role is AD and DS, which is our Active Directory and Domain Services. The next row is our DHCP. The next row is our DNS. The next row is our File and Storage Services. The next row is Internet Services, Remote Access. We have our local server and all our servers. Okay, so we would want to first deal with the concepts that we want to actually work with. So, for example, we said we want a DNS, and DNS pretty much means these are the services that would want our individual computers to be working with. Okay, so whenever we are talking of DNS, maybe I can actually show you before we open our DNS what our DNS does. So, for example, if I go to my Ethernet connection, I go to Internet Protocols, I go to Properties, you then actually see that there's a part where it says DNS server addresses. Okay, so we need to put our DNS server address there so that we can be able to work with our DNS and do certain things on this particular server. So these are the properties that we'll be working with. So in other words, we'll actually need a static IP address for our DNS. Let's go to our Active Directory. If all right, if we want to work with our Active Directory, we need to promote this to a domain controller, okay, which is the next step that we would want to be working with, okay. So for now, I wanted to pretty much work with our video being 20 minutes, and so far we are roughly on 17, 18 minutes. But in the next video, I think we'll be working with our Active Directory, uh, then our DHCP, and some of the concepts that we would want to work with in our server management. So as of now, I think I'll end this video here. I will do a part 2 where we'll continue from where we left off and be able to do some of these concepts. Okay, so maybe before we leave this video, let's just promote this to a domain manager. Okay, so we want to be able to have a domain that we'll be working with for this particular computer. So we'll call the domain, the root domain is just it.co.zw. We click on next. Right? And then for this particular domain, we'll need to have a password, whereby this password controls our domain, where we can then put our password. We click on next. Okay, there's also that aspect of the password being what we might want to have. Okay, so just give me a moment and I will change the password to something that it wants. Like that. We click on next. And then it then tells us a delegation for this DNS cannot be created because the authoritative parent zone cannot be found. Okay, that's not a problem. We click on next. It gives us the NetBIOS name. Will be just IT. We click on next. It gives us the parts. We click on next. As soon as we are done, we click on next. And then it's supposed to give us the content that we want to be working with. And then everything is done. We click on install. Wait for it to install and finish. As soon as it's done, we have promoted our server to a domain controller, and our key domain will be just IT. And that will then give us a starting point for the end of this particular lesson, and we move on to the next lesson. I'm also guessing, depending on the machine that you're working with, I'm not using a server right now, I'm using a laptop. So it might take a bit more time, but you'll still be able to learn and use the concepts of the server while we are doing our learning. So as soon as we are done, this is what it's supposed to ask you. You're about to be signed out. Your computer is being restarted because Active Directory was installed. So with each of these upgrades or updates that we'll be doing regular restarts, because each upgrade or each update gives us new features to our server. So given that we can be able to work with whatever upgrades we would have put or upgrades we want to work with until we are done. So that was pretty fast. Let's just see what it gives us so that we round up this video, and I'll prepare for the next video that's coming. Hopefully you are following along and you can be able to do what you see on this particular video. Okay, so we are back again to the login screen. And we've just promoted this to a domain host or a domain manager, where if we've done it correctly, we should not have any errors, but our internet connectivity should now show that something has changed, and we'll need to add and change a few things. Let's just wait for it to finish up, and then we can be able to take it from there. Okay, we don't seem to have any errors. And it's taking long to load. But as it stands, everything is in order. And since I'm using VirtualBox, I think I can save this particular setup so that when I'm working with it next time, I can be able to just start from where I left off. Okay, so I'm ending the video now. you will catch up